Good evening, everybody. Today, I'm really happy to be able to announce Christof Berns, Professor Christof Berns from the Ruhr-Universität of Bochum in Germany. Christof and I, we have been friends for many years, so that's why it's especially a pleasure for me to announce this lecture. In 1993, Christof had his master's degree, and 1996 his PhD from the University of Cologne. The classical, okay, thank you. This microphone is here because today we also have simultaneous translations. So for those of you who would like to get earphones, please, you can go and get one at the entrance, or there are people waiting to give you earphones if you want some. And we have this simultaneous translation thanks to the generous support of the German embassy here in Ankara, who has made this possible. So, as I already said, Christof studied in Cologne, both his master's degrees and his PhD. He has from the University of Cologne, and he studied, his PhD was on the topic of early Imperial monumental tombs in Asia Minor. Afterwards, he was a research assistant at the Research Archive of Antique Sculptures, again at the University of Cologne. And then he had a postdoctoral fellowship again in Cologne. But then he started moving around. In 1999, he came for a year to Leuven University in Belgium, where he had a fellowship of the Theodor Lienen Stiftung of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. And he was working at the Sagalassos Archaeological Research Project. 2000 and 2001, then he was for 2 years linked to the museums in Berlin, and afterwards he became assistant professor at the University of Kiel in the north of Germany. During this time, for 1 year, he went to Madrid to work on his habilitation, which he then finished in 2006 at the University of Kiel on the centuries in Hispania Tarragonensis, studies of sacred landscape from the 2nd century BC to the 5th century AD. As you can hear, completely different topics, so from the east to the west of the Mediterranean. Between 2007 and 2012, he was acting professor at the Institute of Archaeology at the University of Cologne again, but also at the Institute for Classical Archaeology at the Freie Universität in Berlin. Since 2012, he's professor for classical archaeology at the Ruhr-Universität in Bochum, with a focus on research at Miletus. But from 2012 to 2013, Christof was in Turkey, in Bursa, where he was visiting professor at the Uludağ University, Department of Archaeology. His research mainly focuses on Roman culture in Asia Minor, and more specifically on settlement archaeology, where he's, for example, he's leading a project on micro-identities of Bithynia during the Hellenistic and Roman imperial times, an archaeological survey of Nicaea in, so present-day Iznik in Turkey as well. And third, and probably the major point of focus in his research, however, is the archaeology of ancient cities, and more specifically Miletus. And it is today on Miletus that he is going to talk to us and present the newest research that has been conducted under his leadership. And if all goes well, Christof will be the next director of the excavation at Miletus. So Christof, thank you for coming, and please.
Just a technical announcement, because at this level the mobile phones really make a big effort to get a signal. If you can please switch completely off or turn to flight mode in order not to have this annoying sound. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation to Ankara, and thank you, Lüt, for the very kind introduction. I'm really happy to be here with you and to see old friends and hopefully to make new friends. When Theodor Wiegandt in 1899 took up the excavations of Miletus on behalf of the Royal Museums of Berlin, he was fascinated by the idea of uncovering a metropolis that had been important over several periods. In his first report on the new fieldwork, he gave a short outline of his work program. And from this I quote, "The task is to follow the remains of a superior seafaring metropolis, an ancient Venice, in all epochs. Situated at a bay the biggest river of Western Asia Minor flows into, it was the natural staple port for all goods that came down through the Meander Valley. In the opposite direction, products of the Occident were traded from here deep into Asia. Miletus kept its importance not only in antiquity, but over the Middle Ages, until the 16th century, when its 4 ancient harbors had already been silted up, when the island of Lade, once situated in the entrance of the bay, was already connected to the mainland, and when the traffic with the staple port was only possible by rowing boats on the Meander." End of the quote. A number of indications support Wiegandt's characterization of Miletus as an important commercial metropolis over a long span of time. First, there are the natural conditions of the landscape. The place is situated on the Mediterranean coast at the mouth of the Meander Delta, and the wide Meander Valley, you see here on my slide, created by erosion and sedimentation, cuts through the coastal mountains and forms an important connection with the interior of Anatolia. At the edges of the valley, numerous important cities emerged, and Miletus stands out amongst them by its position and size. Therefore, Miletus was the natural interface of Mediterranean, regional, and Anatolian trade networks. The second indication is the extension and structure of the urban area, as it is known after more than 100 years of excavation. I would like to demonstrate this by comparing the maps of Miletus and Praini, which are presented here on my slide at the same scale. The comparison shows first the typical situation of Miletus. The residential area of Miletus covered a surface of about 3 square kilometers, and thus it was extremely big. This size had consequences for the organization of the urban space, an element that I will come back to in the course of my presentation. In addition, the plan shows how far Miletus was coined by places of trade, at least in specific chronological phases. The Hellenistic South Agora of Miletus, you can see here on the plan, and the adjoining spaces up to the Lion Harbor surpass by far the extension of the commercial areas at Praini. I marked them here on the plan. A third indication of the importance of Miletus as a commercial metropolis over a long period of time are its abundant finds. They do not only prove a long period of urban life, but also demonstrate how the city was connected to the Mediterranean world in different periods. Just 2 examples. On the left of my slide, you see a cup of the so-called Ficellura ware, and this kind of pottery has been produced during the Archaic period at Miletus, and it has been exported to places far away from the production center. Examples of this Ficellura pottery had been found in Naucratis, in Egypt, as well as in the Black Sea region. The photograph on the right-hand side, however, shows a plate of the so-called Miletus ware. This Islamic pottery was produced not in Miletus but in Iznik in northwestern Anatolia during the 4th and the 15th century. It has been found in great numbers at Miletus, hence its name Miletus ware. Thus, this piece may represent the importance of the city in the post-Byzantine period. one could of course also refer to groups of pottery from other periods of time. Altogether, they prove an almost continuous settlement from the late 4th millennium BC to the 5th century AD. The finds also prove an interweaving of the city with different parts of the Mediterranean world and related geographical regions. In spite of these strong arguments for understanding Miletus' specific challenge as the long-term history of a commercial metropolis, past research has only randomly taken up Wiegand's idea. In the first half of the 20th century, the excavations were focused on the urban center of Hellenistic and Roman Imperial Miletus. Here, past generations have uncovered remains of rich public architecture. Not a few of the excavated monuments have become classic examples of their type, also thanks to the impressive reconstructions by the architects von Gerkan, Knackfuß, and Krischen. One example is the Bouleuterion you see here on the left of my slide. And this is a monument whose reconstruction by Fritz Krischen is reprinted in many handbooks on ancient art and architecture. However impressive the results of the excavation of the first half of the 20th century are, they seem mostly to convey the image of the city as a static collection of monumental buildings. In contrast, they give no idea of the diversity of people and their material culture that must have characterized a metropolis like Miletus. Important aspects like the development and structure of the urban space beyond the city center remain unknown to us. At the end of the 20th century, different projects concentrated on single chronological phases in specific parts of Miletus. Most important were the excavations of Volkmar von Greve on Kavaklıdere. They clearly demonstrated that this hill, situated south of the later settlement area, was the center of the archaic city. You see the Kavaklıdere here in the south of the later city center. Before von Greve's discoveries, generations of excavators had searched for archaic Miletus without success. And on the slide you also can see the terraced hill of Kavaklıdere and the area at its southern ramparts, where a number of houses from the 7th and 8th century have been, and 6th century have been uncovered. On the neighboring Humeitepe, the excavations on the neighboring Humeitepe made up a second focus of research on archaic Miletus. Here, the sanctuary of Aphrodite Olcus, previously only known from literary sources, was discovered in 1989. Its architecture is mostly destroyed, but its rich finds mirror intensive offerings of votives from different parts of the ancient world. A further important topic of those decades was Bronze Age Miletus. Wolf Dietrich Niemeyer was able to reconstruct a dense succession of early settlements in the area of the later Athena temple. And at this point, to represent this, I show only a map of pre-Iron Age find spots. All the excavation programs I mentioned and a great number of studies of single researchers have enriched our knowledge about Miletus and have helped to write the history of its development. But in spite of this rich record of past research, it is still a challenge to understand the long-term history of Miletus from a spatial perspective. Indeed, Wiegand's question about the specific character of the commercial metropolis and its changes in the course of time has not yet been answered. And this is the long-term aim of the new project of Bochum University. I would like to take you through the first steps of this project and the results it generated. Let me first ask a number of questions illustrating how the specific character of Miletus as a metropolis can be understood from the spatial structure as well as from the range of finds. The first question should be, I think, that the great extension of the city must have been a handicap for the communication within the city. Which consequences does this have for the urban space of Miletus? And second, the population of Miletus must have been much more diverse than in smaller places, both in terms of its social situation and its origin. And how far is this specific situation mirrored in the material culture? And third, is the presumed function of Miletus as a crossroads of trade networks mirrored by its buildings, and can the architectural structure contribute to a more precise understanding of this function? Which kind of infrastructure can be found in the different harbors, and how differentiated are the places for stock turnover? And fourth, how does the spectrum of finds look like compared to that of other places in the Meander region? Is it possible to deduce a kind of hierarchy of the availability of commodities? And fifth, which are the natural resources of Miletus, and how did these resources contribute to the economy of the city in different periods? These questions can only be answered in a long-term research program with a number of sub-projects. A first step was a surface survey that we started in 2014 with the permission of the General Directorate of Antiquities in Ankara, under the umbrella of the German Archaeological Institute, and with the financial support of the Merkur Foundation, as well as my university. And this project is dedicated to the study of one specific district of Miletus, more specifically Humeitepe, in the northeastern part of the city. Humeitepe is a long hill with a surface about 25 hectares, and our digital elevation model you see on the right of my slide shows the topography of the hill that originally reached out far into the Meander Delta. The plain at the foot of the hill, you can see here the green plain, and also here in blue. This plain represents the original water surface that is now silted up. The hill becomes broader in the southern part, where it encloses a bay that was used as a harbor. The spatial relationship of the hill to the rest of the urban area was complex. The southern part of the hill connects directly to the post-archaic town center here in this area, as well as to two harbors in the east and in the west. It therefore represents an area of high connectivity. In contrast, the northern part has rather a peripheral character. Because of the steep profile of the terrain, access to the hill was impossible from the north. This complexity makes Humeitepe an interesting area and a good starting point to look for the historical dynamics of the settlement development. Research on this part of the town has, however, been neglected for long. The often used plan of Miletus, produced by Walter Wendt in the 60s, shows only a few and somewhat erratic walls. In addition to these walls, you can see a number of trial trenches from the excavations of Theodor Wiegand, for example, here. Only at the end of the 20th century we see the beginning of a systematic research on the hill. Harald Stümpel from the University of Kiel conducted a full geographical survey that covered the whole urban area. Humeitepe has been surveyed mostly by geomagnetic prospections. The most important result of this work was the regular street grid that appears as dark rectangular lines on the geophysical image. This grid extended almost overall of the hill. Only the area in the north, you can see here, is excluded from the grid. In some areas, the geophysical image proves a dense housing within the insulae. Buildings appear as white lines indicating non-magnetic anomalies. And most probably these white lines reflect the existence of limestone walls. Surfaces in uniform gray, however, like in this area, indicate undeveloped areas. As we have seen, the geophysical survey already proved that Humeitepe was part of the densely inhabited urban area of Miletus. We do not know, however, in which periods the hill was included in the urban area and when its surface was structured by a regular street grid. Moreover, a comprehensive idea of the development of Humeitepe would also include indications of the character and the respective chronological periods of settlement activities. Further sources for the history of Humeitepe are the results of 2 trial trenches my colleague Fikret Özcan from Sparta University opened to control the results of the geophysical survey. His results will hopefully be published soon. Our project now attempts to combine the results of these past investigations of the hill with new studies to achieve a comprehensive research of this settlement, of his settlement history. And therefore, in the last 3 years, we intensively surveyed Humeitepe. As a basis, we laid out a grid of polygons of 20 by 20 meters, and only the southern part was excluded from this grid, because here the situation has been disturbed by a large number of trial trenches from past excavation campaigns. The single polygons were divided into 4 transects, each of them 5 meters wide. And these transects have been walked in one direction. On a strip of about 2 meters wide, all finds were collected and statistically documented. Diagnostic sherds were documented individually. They will serve as a basis to answer questions of chronology. Numerous students of the Bochum Institute of Archaeology joined the fieldwork, as well as the processing of finds. And indispensable help was provided by Sabine Hui from Bochum and Barbara Weissova from Berlin and Prague. And I wish to thank all of them sincerely. Our selection of survey finds from Humeitepe demonstrates already at the first glance the long period of settlement activity in this part of the town. The material includes pottery from all periods between the Archaic and the Ottoman times. Among the selection in my photograph, you find tablewares as well as coursewares, and especially numerous fragments of amphorae, like this one, for example. But we have also found evidence of residential buildings, for example, fragments of wall plaster, like here, wall revetments of marble or tesserae from mosaic floors. Finally, the production and processing of goods is attested by loom weights, slags, and fragments of mortaria. We did not finalize the processing of finds yet, and therefore their full significance is not clear. Nevertheless, in the following, I will try to develop at least a rough idea of the settlement history of Humeitepe, starting with the preliminary results of our survey. Naturally, the outcome will have to be controlled in the course of future work. The oldest finds from Humeitepe so far belong to the Archaic period. Does this mean, however, that the hill already was an integral part of the urban area during this period? And is the layout of the street grid of Archaic origin, like some researchers assume? Or should we rather understand these finds as reflections of limited settlement activity, like other colleagues have proposed? For illustration of the different approaches or of the contrasting hypothesis, I would like to compare the plans of Alex Herder to the right and Franziska Lang to the left. The spatial and chronological distribution rather seems to indicate a shift in the Hellenistic period. Whereas the Hellenistic finds are more or less, you see the distribution on the right, are more or less evenly distributed on the hill. The Archaic finds, you see on the left, seem to concentrate on a number of places. Maybe Humeitepe was a place with only limited occupation during the Archaic period and was in fact not part of the urban area. These are, however, preliminary impressions based on a first screening of the finds only. But 2 observations may further support this first impression. The first observation is related to the fortifications of Miletus. According to the last research by Irene Blum, these fortifications belong to different periods. Blum has mapped all remains of these fortifications and has dated them by comparing masonry techniques with remains elsewhere and, where possible also by stratigraphic data. And according to Blum, the Humeitepe fortifications have been built only in the Hellenistic period, whereas the section on the neighboring theatre hill goes back to the Archaic period. In the pre-Hellenistic period, Humeitepe may therefore have been a suburban area with only limited building density. A second observation is related to a striking polygonal wall that was built on the topmost point of the southern area of the hill. This wall should belong to the pre-Hellenistic period. You see my photographs of the wall on the right and the position of the wall in the geophysical image here on the left. And the overlay of the topographical map of Bend, these are the yellow lines on the plan, with the geophysical image clearly shows that the orientation of the wall does not correspond to the regular street grid. Just to repeat, it's here. And therefore the wall must have been built before the grid was established. Given its monumentality and its significant position, it should have been a part of an important structure. We want to clarify this point next summer with a limited excavation at that place. This polygonal wall is the only architecture related to pre-Hellenistic settlement activity on the hill so far. In the classical period, we have the first testimonies of a sanctuary on the northern tip of the hill. There are large numbers of ceramic and clay figurines dated to a period from the 5th to the 2nd century BC. And you can see some examples on the right-hand side of my slide. By some colleagues, these finds in this area are connected to the cult place for Demeter. Whereas in later phases, the sanctuary clearly had an infrastructure of substantial buildings, it seems to have been a modest cult place with no more than temporary architecture in the pre-Hellenistic period. After limited activities during the Archaic and Classical periods, the situation changed dramatically in Hellenistic times. I already mentioned the significant increase of finds from that period and their more even distribution. In addition to that, we now see a number of substantial buildings that must have given the area an impression of an urban imprint. One example is the architecture of the Century of Demeter. A temple and a banquet building have been erected here at the end of the 3rd century BC. You see the plan on the right. And from this, Wolfgang Müller-Wiener has reconstructed the temple in the shape of a prostylus, and according to the preserved parts of the walls, it had been made from marble, completely from marble. The function of the adjacent building to the south here is not entirely clear, but the suggestion of Sven Schipporeit that we are dealing with a small banqueting hall is attractive. A further important addition to the sanctuary was a substantial wall providing a wide terrace and clearly limiting the sacred precinct from the surrounding areas. You see the remains of the wall here on the plan. This terrace wall fits into the regular street grid that appears on the geophysical image. You can see the wall here. And therefore, the street grid must have been established before the architecture of the sanctuary was built. It is tempting to connect this process of urbanization with the early Hellenistic fortification of the hill I mentioned before. And taking the different indications together, it looks as if at the end of the 4th century, the area of Humeitepe, up to that point only scarcely inhabited, was systematically developed. A further indication for this also is a Hellenistic water pipe connecting the hill to the water supply of Miletus. And this water pipe is shown as a parabolic line on the geophysical image. You can see it here. In 2001, my colleague Fikret Özcan made a trial trench at exactly this point and found a number of water pipes and a built sewer. His drawing on the right-hand side shows plan and profile of the trial trench. And one of the water pipes, the one given in red here, can be dated to the Hellenistic period. According to a further colleague, Gerhard Tutas, who has done comprehensive research on the water supply of Miletus, this water pipe belongs to a pipeline that brings drinking water from a range of hills to the south of the city into the urban area. Therefore, these water pipes are a further indication for the systematic development of the Humeitepe. An important role in this development must have been played by the harbour on the eastern edge. This area is dominated by a natural bay, you can see in the aerial photograph here, that had a depth of several meters according to the seismic investigations by the geophysics. The bay is enclosed by the Hellenistic fortification wall, which clearly shows as a white line in the geophysical image. You can trace it here. And this line is interrupted 2 times, respectively in the north and the south. Here the street is shown, for example there, starting from the grid, but changing its direction and cutting the fortification at a right angle. At these points, access to the harbour seems to have been provided by a pair of gates. And one of these gates has been excavated in 2011 under the direction of my colleague Helga Bunke. The gate is 3 meters wide and it has been completely covered with marble blocks. The outer facade is decorated with the relief of a female personification. The figure is slightly turned to the right side, the direction of the gateway, and obviously lifted her right arm. Based upon this posture, one may expect a second figure as a counterpart, and both figures framing the gate. Altogether, this gate was an elaborate building emphasizing this entrance to the city. In addition to the monument, the geophysical image gives some indications for the infrastructure of the harbour. Beyond the harbour wall, white rectangles refer to quays in this area, you see them there, while a white surface without indications of streets stands out on the inner side of the wall in this area here. And in contrast to the surrounding areas, this part appears in uniform grey color. The area has obviously not been developed and no buildings can be expected here. This impression is further supported by a result of our survey, more specifically the distribution of roof tiles. Roof tiles are spread over almost the whole hill. Only those areas that are disturbed by trenches and where no material has been collected, plus the open space at the harbour, appear empty. Oh, here's the distribution map, and these are areas in which we didn't collect roof tiles, but this we surveyed completely, and you see there's almost no evidence for roof tiles. And this situation argues, to my understanding, for an open stockyard at this place, an area where commodities were stored and sold. Such a stockyard was obviously important for the operation of a harbour. It should have attracted many people whose activities must have spread into the adjacent streets of the quarter. At the moment, we cannot ascribe a specific function to the harbour at Humeitepe in relation to the other harbours that existed at Miletus. From Strabo, we know that at his time, the city had no less than 4 of them. The harbours known from Strabo were one located at a bay near the theatre, then the Lion Harbour between the Theatre Hill and Humeitepe. Yes, you see it here, then the Humeitepe Harbour and probably the East Harbour in this area. While the Lion Harbour is normally connected to the war fleet, a mercantile function is usually assumed for the other harbours. In this context, the advantage of the harbour at Humeitepe may have been its position at the east side of the Milesian Peninsula. Unlike the theatre harbour on the opposite side of the peninsula, and this theatre harbour is known to have silted up many times, and unlike this, the Humeitepe harbour was turned away from the sea current and the prevailing wind direction. Therefore, it was probably easier to keep it clear. The total amount of commodities arriving at Miletus may also have made it necessary to operate more than one harbours at the same time. Humeitepe was not only important for the exchange of goods, it must also have been an area of production. This is again demonstrated by the results of our survey. We have found great numbers of purple snails and loom weights like the ones you see on my slide. Probably these finds are related to the production and coloring of cloth, which according to many sources was one of the most important export products of Miletus. Numerous literary testimonies mention the high quality of Milesian wool that is said to have been especially soft, and they refer to the luxury of the clothes and blankets made from this cloth. In addition to that, other products must have had their origin on Humeitepe. In the course of our survey, we found a significant number of iron slacks, objects that refer to metal workshops. Different testimonies thus make it clear that Humeitepe must have been a place of artisanal and other economic activities. At the same time, elaborate houses must have been built on the hill. Indications are again given by the survey finds, among them painted wall plaster and a bigger number of tesserae, that is small stones from mosaic floors. See here the typical tesserae, and these are fragments from wall plaster. And our distribution map to the right shows that the tesserae are clustered in areas near the center of the hill. In the same area, the plan of a peristyle house appears in the geophysical image. Here, the white lines, you can see them there. These white lines are indicating limestone walls, and I have, for better clarity, I have marked them in yellow on the right-hand side. And these lines form a number of rooms that are arranged around an open space. So, probably a peristyle house. In the Roman Imperial period, the settlement activity does not seem to have changed fundamentally. The total number of finds is even higher, and they extended over the whole hill. This situation matches with the fact that the fortification wall of Humeitepe has been renewed in the course of the 3rd century AD. Some sections of this so-called wall of the Goths are preserved at the foot of the hill. The section on my slide shows the typical construction of spolia and irregular blocks held together with mortar. Obviously, the Humeitepe was at this time still an urban area that was important enough to be defended. In the Roman Imperial period, we also see significant changes to the urban landscape, and on Humeitepe 2 public baths were built. One of the baths around 100 AD at the southern foot of the hill. This is a big public bath, you see here on the right and there on the plan. A big public bath with a Peristyle Court. The remains of a second bath building are situated on the east slope, directly opposite the harbour gate. Here, a pillar and some traces of walls are left from what must have been a bigger structure. And this pillar is made from stone blocks and also bricks, you see on the photograph. Again, the geophysical images give further indications. A survey with geomagnetics and georadar has been conducted in this area by Philipp Niewöhner and Harald Stümpel. The plan you see here shows the harbour gate to the east, and then the walls of this building here, both in grey, and then the geophysics, the geomagnetics and the georadar images. And the white lines of the image you can see here, they refer to non-magnetic structures, most probably limestone walls, while highly magnetic tiles You can see them here appear in black. So these tiles will belong to the hypocausts in the floor. Taken together, we see a comparatively small bath building with a sequence of different rooms. And the central area rests on hypocausts and was thus heated. The significance of these bath buildings is better understood when putting them in the context of the urban area. This is what I try to visualize with a plan that shows the distribution of Roman imperial bath buildings in the residential areas of Miletus. Again, I give the situation at Praini for comparison. At Miletus, at different points of the central city area, 3 big baths have been built. You can see them here. And all of them have been built in the course of the 2nd century, beginning, middle, and the end of the 2nd century. In addition to these, a number of smaller baths emerged in the periphery. In contrast, the smaller city of Praini had only 1 big public bath situated between theatre and agora in this area. The distribution of bath buildings at Miletus is a consequence of the urban area's extreme extension. Certain facilities of public infrastructure were not concentrated in the town center, but rather allocated to various parts of the city. As such, the inhabitants could visit a bath in their neighborhood without taking a long way to the city center. I am sure the Milesians appreciated this availability of baths in their own neighborhood. On the other hand, this plurality of public infrastructure led to disparate experiences that may be typical for life in a metropolis, and the inhabitants of a certain quarter lived in a community without necessarily having many contacts to other communities. The diversity of the metropolis is also reflected in another group of sources from Humeitepe. These are small altars that have been found in greater numbers on the hill. Unfortunately, their exact find spots have not been documented. According to the inscriptions, a part of them stood in sanctuaries, and another part may well have been altars of private houses. According to their votive inscriptions, some of these altars have been set up by foreigners living in Miletus. They are, for example, dedicated to Zeus Labraundios, a carving goddess, or to Zeus Lararios, the god of trolleys on the upper Meander River. While the Roman imperial period had been a time of high settlement activity on Humeitepe, and while the area had been characterized by an urban architecture, the Byzantine period marks a sharp contrast. This becomes obvious from the small amounts of ceramics from this period. The pottery fragments, you can see the distribution on the right-hand side. The pottery fragments are concentrated on few areas which can partially be connected to simple built structures. The respective buildings are not oriented according to the street grid. And this situation can be related to a far-reaching alteration of the urban space Philipp Niewöhner has demonstrated for the Byzantine period. First of all, in connection with the Arab invasion of the 7th century, a small part of the city had been encircled by a new fortification. At the same time, specific elements of the old city seem to have been preserved, and among them, the entrance of the Serapis temple here. While the temple proper has been knocked down, its front had a new function as a city gate. The new circle of fortifications does not mean that all areas outside these ramparts were given up immediately. A couple of new buildings have been built at least in the southern part of the former urban area. Here, for example, a number of churches were newly built, and a public bath as well as a house were reconstructed. A fundamental change took place only in the Middle Byzantine period, and indications for this come from some structures on the theatre hill that have been studied in the course of the last couple of years. Inside the late Byzantine walls, here on the theatre hill, we see a number of small buildings, and their orientation does not longer fit to the old street grid. For example, a little bit difficult to see from here, but I think these are Yes, here, for example, some of these late Byzantine buildings. And the reason that their orientation does not longer fit to the old street grid must be that the Milesians left their city in the Middle Byzantine period. When they resettled on the theatre hill at a later point, the old streets had already lost their function. Therefore, the street grid could no longer provide orientation for newly erected buildings. And thus, at Miletus we can directly track the transformation from an ancient metropolis to a small fortified settlement. The Humeitepe had more or less been given up already in the early Byzantine period. From there on it remained a suburban area without traces of settlement. In the period of the Anatolian Beyliks, when Miletus was named Palatia and belonged to the Principality of Menteşe, only a cemetery was located in its southern part, near to the center of the new settlement of Palatia. An important part of this Islamic city were the trading houses that were located at the Lion Harbor and the Theatre Harbor. That is in the western part of the settlement and of course near the sea. At this time, the harbor on Humeitepe seems to have been used only for the removal of building material from the site. In the surroundings of the harbor bay lie a great number of architectural elements from big public buildings. And you can see some of the examples on my slide to the right. All of these architectural elements are single pieces that obviously have once belonged to separate monuments. Therefore, they cannot stem from one or two substantial buildings on Humeitepe, but must rather have been collected from different places within the city. From the harbor, they would have been removed to other places where they could be used as building material, but for some reason this did not happen. In the post-Byzantine period, the Meander Delta had already been silted up, and this process is documented in a map that was produced in the course of the geoarchaeological research by Helmut Brückner and his team from the University of Cologne. The map on the left visualizes the increasing silting up in a temporal perspective. Within 3,000 years, the former bay completely disappeared due to a combination of erosion and sedimentation processes. Therefore, in the period of the Beyliks, ships could travel to Miletus only via the river. In spite of this fundamental change, the trade connections of Miletus still stretched out to the western Mediterranean. A number of sources even mention a busy commerce on the Meander, the staple of which had been Palatia, that is the post-antique settlement of Miletus. In this time, Arab sources compared the width of the Meander to that of the Nile, while European sources paralleled it to the Rhine. And these comparisons are surely exaggerating, but they still illustrate the enormous importance that was ascribed to the river as an artery for traffic. And Karl Humann, when he came to Miletus in 1891 to explore the possibilities of excavation, still saw ships anchoring in the Meander to load goods, albeit at his time the traffic seems only to have been of regional relevance. Today, the Humeitepe appears as a bald hill, reminding more of a pastoral landscape than of a vibrant urban area. Yet I hope to have demonstrated that this area of Miletus offers the possibility to study the long-term settlement history of the place and, at the same time, to gain an understanding of the metropolis that is not so much coined by the monumental buildings in the center, but by the diversity of inhabitants and their practices. At the moment, this idea describes rather a research aim because our results are still preliminary. In the next years, we will have to complete processing the results of the survey on Humeitepe and to take up some more of the questions I raised at the beginning of my lecture. Thank you very much.
To thank you for this rich overview and for showing what results can be obtained by means of survey. I think that it is clear to all of us that this kind of survey and this kind of spatial analysis can change how we think about sites that have, in which archaeologists have been working for a long time already. I do think that there will be a lot of questions, so otherwise I will start. If you would see, as you suggested, that the metropolis of Miletus was so big that some of the areas, the mahalle, were basically small entities on their own. Then you have two bath buildings, but you would probably expect some more monumental architecture, public architecture. I mean, they would need, they have churches in the early Christian period, but there should have been temples, for example, in the earlier periods. You have the big one on the far end, the highest point, but are there traces of others, or has too much been transported away from the site afterwards?
Yes, probably this helps us with this question. The situation on Humeitepe is has both advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that parts of the hill have seen much erosion, especially the topmost part, and so there it's very difficult to trace buildings. Then we see areas in the middle of the hill where the geophysical image indicates lots of building or lots of building activities, but so far we can't trace any precise plans. We don't see temples. I would say why not? I mean, I would expect that there had been temples, and at least we have this monumental sanctuary on the tip of the peninsula. I would also say that this polygonal wall I talked about, I mean, this has really the appeal of an old sanctuary, but we will have to look it up. I mean, at the moment it's just a wall building in a very impressive position. So I won't go too far with my interpretation. But yes, in total, it gives me the imagination of really a part of the city which has many aspects of a known city. Also the gate, I think, is characteristic because it's really an impressive building that is made or built as representative entrance to the city with all this marble and the sculptures. So this probably also at some part in the history of Miletus, Humeitepe harbor has really been the most important harbor of the city. This at the moment we cannot say. I mean, we have these probably four harbors in the city, and it's difficult to say something based on evidence about about the chronological span in which these harbors have been used. But it may well be possible that really Humeitepe in a certain part of the life of the city has been extremely important.
It looks like it, I think. Any other questions?
I mean, you said about the southern part, southeastern part, where there is no building activities there. Actually, is it much higher than the sea level, original sea level? Because it could just as well be swamp area, no? I mean, another thing, in the water, I mean, so-called water, there is that rectangular building. What it is? With white spot.
Yeah, I think a cave.
What?
A cave for ships. I mean, a landing for ships. And the this flat area there, it's of course near the sea, but it's let's say a meter above the sea level. I mean, it's clearly about above the level of the the bay, and of course there's the wall between the sea and, I mean, the city wall, the fortification wall.
It's
between.
going down the wall.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
It's not, you cannot see very well there.
Yeah. But for example, I mean, the gate Helga Bunke excavated is here, and then the wall continued, and this is an area that could not be surveyed with the that would not be included in the geophysical survey, because there is a, how do you call it, I mean,
Slope.
it goes to a
Steep
slope.
slope,
There
yeah.
is a slope, and it's so steep that they couldn't survey this.
So I would like to know how big is the insula on the Humeitepe?
Frankly, I would have to look it up, but about. Frankly, I would have to look it up, but you see the scale here, and it's about 50 meters by 30. But I have the precise
Okay.
measurement is not in my mind.
Thank you.
It's smaller though than the insula in the southern part, and this is, I think, quite important.
The dating?
Huh.
The dating?
We all would like to know this. I mean, we will, of course. The problem is that Fikret Özcan did the sondage, but he stopped at the Hellenistic level for reasons that were not under his responsibility, and he was told to stop there. And probably, I mean, yeah, we will just have to, in the next summer, when we will start to excavate on the Humeitepe, one of our first tasks will to be to make a trial trench, 1 or 2 trial trenches in the streets, just to try to get a date for the street grid.
But it must be earlier than Peristyle House, no? Because
Yeah.
the Peristyle House doesn't
Of
fit
course.
really
Yeah,
to the
my-
insula. It's somewhere in the middle, like.
Can you repeat the question in the microphone?
The question was the date of the street grid and the relationship to the Peristyle House, and the Peristyle House fits into the street grid. It fits. It just covers the southern part of such an insula. And the second indication is that the temple, the Hellenistic temple on the north, this also fits into the street grid, especially this terrace wall. And so my feeling would be that this is part of an urbanization process. The grid, the monumentalization of the sanctuary in the north, also the water supply, because according to the research of Gerhard Tutas, who did this, he wrote this thick book on the water supply of Miletus. According to him, these water pipes are connected to water supply from the south, and water supply that should it brings the water from the south of the peninsula into the north of the urban area. So also this would be a kind of part of the development of the city.
Could you tell us more about the
microphone for the translator.
maybe I missed it, but could you tell us more about the excavated gate? It looked very small to me. Is it partial or is it completely excavated, or I missed it totally, but I'm interested in that.
The gate has been completely excavated. You can just look for the photograph. No, for selection. Yes. Well, that's the gate. It's the opening for the street is 3 meters wide. I mean, it's not a huge gate, but it's substantial. I mean, 3 meters is not. I mean, it's a normal normal gate, and Yeah, here you can see parts of the city wall. The fortification wall has been made of limestone, but in the area of the city gate, it has been covered with marble. So this also shows the impressive appearance of the city gate.
Did you say that the city was abandoned in the Middle Byzantine period?
Yes.
And why would this be, do you think?
According to the results of Philipp Niebuhr, he had this research program on Byzantine Miletus in the last 5 years, and according to him, from many findings within the area of the city, it's quite clear that the city had been abandoned. The reason for this is not entirely clear. I mean, even Philipp Niebuhr is not really sure about the reason, but the situation is very obvious, and it's also obvious that then in the late Byzantine period there has been a resettlement, but the resettlement is no longer oriented on the street grid. So it's really a new, small fortified settlement on the hill, and it's only on the hill. Whereas the early Byzantine settlement includes many parts of the lower city as well.
I think that we can continue discussion over a glass of wine, and I would like to thank Christof once again for the nice lecture and for the interesting research that is ongoing in Miletus, and wish you lots of success with the research in the coming years. Thank you very much.